Okay, great. So it's good to be back. So most of you, almost all of you, just did POX. We have one POX member from a while back. So this is great. This is a great transition into some more detailed work. So POX has this kind of overarching story, and we're going to dig into all sorts of networks through this course. And the first stuff will be just simply branching networks, right? So it's sitting inside you right now, blood networks. These bits are, this is not so much, the neural networks are a bit of a different category, but the blood network stuff, the stuff that's keeping us going, that's a big deal. So there'll be a scaling story for that. They'll be connected to mice and elephants, the whole madness. River networks. So we'll talk about river networks as well. So these are sort of these two big kind of branching network structures. And they have some beautiful fractal features. In some ways, they were the first quantified kinds of fractals, actually, right? So we'll talk about that. Lots of history of science as usual. What else is going on? So I'm going to rebuild the website. There is a website for this, but this is the sort of thing that's going to start to look like madness like this, right? So yes. I've discovered Foundation, so I can do all sorts of things. I discovered that I could actually use it. Anyway, so there's that. Where are we? We're here. It's possible we'll call it coconuts, but this will look much better, or some variable set of names. Okay. Coconuts? Yes.
As far as office hours go, in the Western, we switched around first.
Yeah, we can change.
I have a conflict this one, I don't know about other people.
All right. So we can have some sort of vote for that. So that's no good at all, 9 to 12 in the morning.
I'm doing a class with Jenny from 8:30 to 12.
Yeah. Okay, fine. Yeah, and we can have a couple of different points during the week. There will be, of course, these assignments to do, so sort of a similar nature to what we've had before. Okay, yes. So all the basics are here. So one thing I've done is, so this isn't quite finished yet. Again, this is all going to be fixed up completely. Much nicer stuff's going to come. So you'll see the slides are here, but there's some broken links. I need to put up the little things. So we'll get that there. But what has happened is I've thrown in what I will call an expansion pack. You guys don't need it, but it's from POX. So I have a little setting that says expansion pack, and that's what those are. So there are quite a few sets of slides, so 5 sets of slides, and if you weren't here last time, there'd be 8 videos to watch, which is pretty grueling. Anyway, so we've warmed up the networks thing, right? So you guys are rolling along with networks. Be good. Anyway, but just so it makes the whole thing of a piece, that's going to be structured like that. Okay. A little bit of where we're going to start with, right? So here's our little expansion pack, the 1 ABC through E. There's going to be an introduction to possibly coconuts. That's what we'll have. It'll be quick. I won't go through everything. I'll just touch on some of the things we talked about in POX. This is very exciting. I mean, this is the huge, complex networks, gigantic field. All right, very exciting. You can now get a PhD in networks at Northeastern, where Barabbas and Vespignani and these characters are. Okay, it's really systems, but networks are the things. Okay, so branching networks, we're going to have a couple of pieces there, and then optimal supply networks, right? So we'll have things about where to put your Starbucks and McDonald's, where to put your public schools and your hospitals, how best to allocate them, depending on what you want, right? Do you want to make as much money as possible? Do you want to be good to people and make it easy for them to get to your place, right? So there's a cost story there, and we've looked at optimization stories before. That's going to come in a little while. Blood, water, and the Church of Quarterology. So this is going to be about optimal supply networks. So this is a different story where you're sprinkling little local sources all throughout a country, for example, right? So you're putting your Starbucks, a little source, right? And the humans come in and get it everywhere. And then here we're talking about a single supplier, a source, right? So your blood is pumping out from your heart, but it's also being collected, right? It's coming back through the venal system. So there are these 2 networks there. There's a collection network and a supply network. River networks you can think of as kind of a collection network. They come to an output point, right? So that's a big deal with branching networks. There's some nice little details. Murray's law is a very famous law coming to from the study of tubes and pipes. So how should your pipes kind of be structured. So there's a little fork in a pipe. What sort of shape should they have? So we'll get to that. That's from the 1910s or 20s, but people have cut up trees and found that these things match, which is quite nice. And of course, they've done things to organisms to find out all sorts of details about networks. All right, we'll talk about that as well. Okay, all right, so that's kind of where we're going to start with. Then we'll get into random networks again, which you've seen a little bit of, but we'll go into the generating functionality business and really solve some of the more difficult problems. Lots of other things will come later on. And I will expand a few pieces. Let's see, so topics is sort of roughly okay. There is a syllabus you can download. This should all be much bigger, so let's make it bigger. Beautiful piece that we'll get to will be, this is going to be later, community detection algorithm. So you've got this huge network. You cannot just plop it on a screen and look at it. It's just a big ball of nonsense, right? So you need something to go in there and say, well, there's kind of this big community here and a big community here and a big community. They interact. Then within those communities is something, right? So that's been a gigantic area of research. Just unbelievable number of papers with ridiculous numbers of citations. So that's huge. What else? Really difficult problems with networks. There's a paper that just came out recently by Michael Kearns where they're claiming they can kind of basically find the bad guys in networks without hurting the privacy of the good guys, which is sort of usually the overwhelming number. Interesting, delicate situation. How do you anonymize data if you've got network, right? You want to get it from a scientific point of view, you want to get it. From a commercial point of view, you want to do all sorts of things with that as well. From a defense point of view, people want to, the NSA is very interested in network structure. So everyone's got something they want from it. But if you want to anonymize it, really difficult problem, super difficult problem. If you want to anonymize it and make it still useful, still have some of the network stuff in there, very hard. Okay, we'll get this generalized notions of contagion that glues together social and biological contagion, which is very nice. We may get to that. We'll get to organizations, perhaps. What else is there? Okay, bipartite networks. So this will be an extension of random networks, and it's this generalization from boards and directors, right? That kind of idea. So given there are these two aspects, and maybe there's tripartite, it could be something like that, right? But so, people and something that connects them together. It could be the films they're in. It could be where they live, right? So something like that. So that's a really beautiful area that we'll get to. Let's see. Okay, lots of things. And I'm going to expand some other stuff. There's going to be multi-layer networks, which is something that people have talked about for a long time, but it's become kind of formalized, which is that there are simply networks connected together. And we talked about this a little bit. The power grid and a communication system on top of it, right? So if something happens to one of them, what happens to the other one? And you can, of course, have fun if you're a physicist, and you can worry about it in real ways if you're a normal human being. Okay, so that's sort of a start. What else is going on? There are a few other things. There's some visualizing network stuff. You can play around with this, but I'll improve that. Yes. And the syllabus, you can read through that. Okay. This is all over the place. All right. What else do I need to say? I think we'll do the overview. Won't be too long. And yes, really good. Great. See, coconuts. Clip clop. Okay. It's horse themed. All right. I know that's ridiculous. Okay, so let's see if this little thing still works. Oh, good. All right, so these people are still involved. Okay, so just a bit about the course. And I've, we've had these things before. I'm just going to quickly say them again. So we're just starting off again with networks. And yeah, right, little nutshell for you. So you've seen some of these things, but I won't go through everything again. This thing has lost its ability. All right, so there'll be more tarot cards, of course. We'll have to do that. We have a John Dory, and the sun is the beginning of things, complex networks complex, so we're doing that. You know that we're part of Story Lab. Some of you have gotten involved. This has gotten bigger since I last saw you. Lots of exciting things. Okay, that's all. Things that just I tend to put into talks. All right. Okay, so we're meeting here, and we will figure out office hours. Yes, okay, we'll figure it out. but it'll be over at Farrell. Everything else is there. There is a separate Twitter handle for this course, Networks Vox, but I've stuck the whole thing back into Slack, which we'll talk about in a second. There's a syllabus and the poster. There's a poster. Oh my God. I just spent a lot of time on this. Anyway, so this is tentative. We'll fix this up. Just a reminder, there is a graduate certificate, and if you want to get that, you should contact Maggie Epstein. PUX is part of it, one of the core things. There's also modeling complex systems, which is Maggie's course, and then this one, possibly called Coconuts. Okay, but there are several tiers. There's A-level courses and B-level courses, and you have to get some mixture of them. You need 5 in total, and you can get yourself a certificate. So anyone can do that. We do have a master's that is underway. This is his first year of it in complex systems and data science, and so these courses form a core of it, where we have added Bagro's Data Science 1 and 2. All right, so we're building out the whole plan. We'll have a PhD eventually too. Okay, I need a better one of these. Okay, so you know something about this. I don't know if you guys get into it, but there is the there is the handout version. If you want to print these things out, you can. You can navigate around them, yes. Web links look like this. We have all these things. I'm going to give you all the references, and where I can, I'll give you the paper, and someone will complain about it. I occasionally get emails saying, why do you have those papers on a server? And I say, okay. It's bad. It's really bad. Information, we want to share this stuff, right? Anyway, this has been a bad thing. This whole giving your paper to someone else and then freely reviewing for them. Sorry, it's just really awful. And then they make money out of it. All right, so we'll have books, a few books, and then there's the craziness of what's underneath it that you don't want to look at. That's bad. I will put it on GitHub. I will get there. Okay, good. So we're okay? Good? These things won't work. I don't think that, ooh. Oh, wow. Come on. That's new. Come on. It's going to fail. So rude. So it's season 7. PUX I've taught more often. I started actually with complex networks. That was my first course. The other problem is that I've lost control of the mouse. Here it is. Come on. Okay. Usual thing. Anyway. Yeah, sometimes there's a cat involved at the introduction to courses. That is actually that's the start of some lecture from PUX, I think. Yeah, from 2013. Ridiculous cat. Anyway, I think I was describing singular value decomposition to the cat. Very interested. It's a terrible cat. Okay, this is how my lectures, look at this, how bad this is. It's terrible. Oh my God, unbelievable. What a mess. Okay, so trying people, always trying to make these things better. I've got supported by NSF. That's why there's this madness here before you, all right? So that's part of it. It's finished now, but it was a career grant from social economic sciences. So of course the math people think I'm not one of them, and yeah, all right. Okay, Slack. We're going to use Slack, Team Coconuts. See, you're warming up to it. You like it? No, all right. Okay, think of it as a horse. Yeah, all right. Okay, so we'll get the Slack thing going again. We'll just crank that up. So all of you are on it, actually, I think, right? You're on it, yeah. So we're good. Everyone will behave. It's a good thing. I never see I never see any, if you make private groups or you have private discussions, I don't see them. I'm the owner of the thing, but I don't see them. I just get a percentage. So I know that, so it's good. So it's just a sort of a nice thing. So this is the same as PUX, basically, I think. But we'll have this, you guys, many of you will continue your projects, I expect, which will be great. And so I want to do something, I'd really like to see something different this time around, which would be to have all projects have a GitHub and a Git Pages product, right? So that at the end of the semester, you will have somewhere, I mean, I'm suggesting GitHub and Git pages because that's just a good thing to do. You will have a kind of a cool website to show off other people, right? As a design project of sorts, but an intellectual one that you can, whatever you're doing next, if you want to get jobs or, make yourself useful in the world by doing graduate work, right? Earn lots of money in that way, then, this is all good. This is a good thing to have. So I want to see, and we want to see that with the masters as well, that you have this, at least one design project, right? Nice, beautiful thing. I mean, it's a great time to do this stuff. This has been such a struggle, right? With Flash, 7 years ago, 5 years ago, Flash was sort of the big thing, and JavaScript, which has just been hanging around forever, has been made into something that works. That's a hairy business, but you can certainly make beautiful things that seem to have a chance of enduring, right? I don't know. So it's just, we were really good at making figures for a long time. We've sort of got that stabilized pretty well. But dynamic, interactive stuff, it's been in a massive development in the last 5 or 6 years. Things like the New York Times has come from, nowhere. They've had to sort of dig themselves out of, like, everything has to be printed, right? And then there's some crazy guys that they employed, and they sort of forgot about who would make things that jiggled around, and they're like, I don't know what to do with it. Anyway, they've come to accept it. Now they have a data scientist head, Chris Wiggins, who's at Columbia. Okay, so lots of adaptations. So you guys, you see beautiful things all the time. So that would be great. I think that would be a good thing. All right. We still have this grading thing. We have a Department of Truth again, right? And so you know about that. These are important things. You know about these things, or you should generally have them. They're here. What else is here? Okay, all right. So here's roughly the plan. I said we'll start with branching networks. There'll be 1 and 2, there'll be optimal supply next, there'll be this thing about quarterology, which is what I call quarterology. We're going to have a bit of a tricky thing here. We'll get into random networks. This is still random bipartite networks. Lots of stuff about contagion, sortativity, so how you can play around with that. This will evolve a fair bit. Multi-layer networks I want to talk about, structure detection, we'll see. Some really just wonderful, it's a real mixture of beautiful real stuff and then some great math and linear algebra appears and generating functionality appears. It's great. Okay, I think this is right. I think we have this day off. We'll have this one on. This sometimes happens in the spring semester, which has always got one more week than the fall one. Sneaky, yeah. And then we have spring recess. So there'll be just sort of this long period of tragic absence of coconuts. All right. Everyone needs coconuts. All right. It's good food. Okay, I talked about this just now, I suppose. So you guys, this is sort of a standard thing, but if you've got your project, you just keep going, right? Just hammer away at the thing. Project on GitHub. If you haven't been into the VAC and you need to, then talk to me. We'll get that going. Yeah, let's see if we can get some papers out. Right, not everyone gets a paper. That doesn't always work like that, but it's just you really have a go at a project, and that's all good. It became clear to me that some people in the math department thought that every student, I basically just made every student create a paper, and that's why, I had more papers than 0, which is a sort of a mode number of publications per year. That's not true. That's not true. I give you the chance to go crazy, basically, actually. Yeah. And you've seen, you guys do very different things, which is super exciting. Okay, this is my little story, narrative hierarchy. So this is a great thing. You can do it with the whole GitHub thing. You can present this in a really nice way. Little abstract, kind of cute things, and here's some stuff to play with. Really fun. All right. I don't know what to do with this. All right, so I've said these things before, but this is the big story, right? So complex systems very often have complex networks just sitting underneath them, almost all the time. Not completely, but they are in a vast majority of what we think of as complex systems. There's some network structure. Yeah. And so we can get very excited, and physicists in particular and computer scientists have had a tremendous time in the last almost 20 years going berserk. But everyone has started to get on board with this, right? The big data thing has changed the way people approach their subjects and the kinds of people that go into those subjects, right? People are being produced with political science PhDs. They're different. It's what they used to be. I'm not saying better, just different. I know what to do with this thing. Okay. That's what I'll do. Okay, tons of work. And it really starts in 1998, and I'll just recap that as well. Of course, I have this joke. It's these characters, right? The piranha of the physicus. Yes, all right. Okay, they too tend to devour fields, but this has proved to be hard to swallow, right? So networks are still going on. They still invent little areas to harvest, so it hasn't been fully devoured yet, right? Some of these things are gone. Chaos was fully consumed. We're good. All right. Okay, and I've updated these things. Let's see, yesterday. I need another one of these things. So 28,000 citations for the Watts and Strogatz paper. It's pretty good. It's pretty good. It's pretty good. I mean, I've said this, right? Google Scholar, you get a little flag if you get 10 for a paper. They're like, yay, you're a champion. I mean, it's definitely something to get one. That's not you citing yourself. That's also important. And so I last taught this course a couple of years, right, in 2014. So this, I had to add 7,000 here. That's a lot. That's a lot of literature. And of course, most of those citations are networks are interesting. 1 through 23. That's okay. That's okay. So it's really just sort of waving at the whole body of work. These are these fundamental models. I just want to say them again. We've talked about this. We've talked about scale-free networks. Kind of went quickly through this Krapivsky-Redner thing. I may give you some problems on that because that's good, nutritious material. We will get into generalized random networks more deeply, like bipartite structures, for example. This is an area that all I'd give you is just this sort of one slide, but it is in the social sciences this is used, and in statistics this is used much more, but it's a black box kind of business. So I don't really like it. Okay, so that's my point of view. And generalized affiliation networks. So we've talked about that. That's for the small world stuff. So let me quickly say these things, right? So we have random networks. No one knows what Raiders of the Lost Ark is. It's a shame. Okay, we got to this. I don't know what to do with my silly thing. Right, so we talked about this whole business of, and we'll come back to it, but if you weight every network with n nodes and they're labeled A, B, C, that's not a good way to label it, but let's say 1, 2, 3, and then the edges are not labeled, so you add m edges to it, and then make a box full of those, then almost every one that you pick out, with n and m large enough, will have a Poisson degree distribution, right? And that occupied mathematicians for 50 years, pretty close too. I mean, it was just fantastic, really interesting. And you get phase transitions and all sorts of good stuff, really, really interesting. And you have to solve this problem of the giant component, like what's inside that thing. It's messy and nasty, and we usually avoid it. We'll see this later on. We avoid it by looking at what's around it and then saying how big it is, which is sneaky, right? But when we started to look at real data, and this is again just the end of the last millennium, we started to see that there are actually degree distributions that are not at all Poisson. And I don't think any significant network that anyone's ever come across in the real world has a Poisson degree distribution. They just aren't there. So when we figured out how to make them, because it's easy to make the pure random, right? Your brain just makes them. You're a mathematician. Your brain just makes the other ones. So these are okay. We can think about how to make them. We can also do it computationally and randomly wire them together, and we can create ensembles of them. Given a real network with a particular degree distribution, we'll rewire things and do it again, and we'll see how many motifs are there or not there, and we can play around with that. All right, so this is good fun. Okay, we will have lots of fun with these things. There's lots of great math, but they're also really, it's an important thing to do, to take a real network, randomize it, see what's missing. See what's non-random apart from the degree distribution, which we understand is the elephant in the room. Okay, networks, free of scale. So this is scale-free networks. I'm going to throw this thing to... Okay, So it's Barabbas Albert. It's a generative model, so this is completely, this is a different thing. The random networks thing, we just make it, right? We just make it. It's not a physical model. We know all about this. This is Simon's model. Rich gets richer. Fantastic stuff. We see it over and over. Seems to be the right story. And the big thing was we got some power law decay, power law size distributions when alpha equals 1. And we could play around with that. We could play around with the mechanism. This is what Krapinski and Redner showed, that you could play around and get different gammas. Right, interesting. Okay, but real networks, there are many, many, many real networks that have this structure. And there are other pieces to them. It might be assortativity. There might be clustering, that you try to account for. All right, so these are just huge things. Of course, we talked about small world, right? Small world networks. So this is, again, one of these very famous ones. It's Watson-Strogatz. We have this local regularity, global randomness, where we add shortcuts. And then suddenly this character is not very far away from this one, and on average that's true. And we understood that to be just a geometric story. And navigation on this was no good, right? So we got to a search problem, and that we solve with various ways. But this was one way. Generalized affiliation network, you've seen this a million times. So there's context in individuals, and they interact in some way. We have some structure in the affiliation, in the identity space, right? We understand how far away teachers might be from doctors. We have some intuition, so we can think about which of your friends are closer to a target person. Okay. There's this generalization. We have different attributes to our identity, and from there you could show that these kinds of the networks that are induced by these are searchable, right? So that, just touching on these things, we're not going to go back into this. We're good. We will, as I said, go more deeply into random networks. We may talk a little bit more about scale-free networks, but we're going to talk about lots of other things. All right. So, just to bring Pox back into your head. There are a couple of textbooks that exist. I should look to see. But these are significant. Mark Newman took a lot, really worked on this one. He has a fantastic review paper. It's somewhat old now, but I'll point you to that. John Kleinberg, MacArthur genius character, so he's in computer science. Easley is in economics, and so this is one of these mixed stories there. There are things you might want to look at, but things you can get for free are these review papers. And you can see they've done well for themselves in terms of citation. This is Albert and Barabbas. This is very soon after their big hit with scale-free networks. Newman's work, it's 2003 actually, yeah, so it's a while. This is a really fantastic body of work, amazing. But yes, it's true, it's going back in time. Review papers take a while to emerge, right? They do. And they tend to get cited very well. You're invited to give them, they get cited very well. Okay, so just to summarize where we are. So it's the late 1990s, just right, huge. I can't even believe, I can't get my head around how many papers there are or what the fields are. And yeah, it's too much now, right? So you have to kind of process, you need some sort of search thing to sort it out for yourself. And it's made this sort of talk about complex systems, which, it's kind of a frustrating business, but it's definitely given a much more solid mathematical footing that helps some people understand that it's a real thing. Of course, complex systems are real things. And generally speaking, it's these large-scale networks. They're often sparse, right, which means not so many connections. I forgot to bring chocolate. That's bad. So they can be, we'll look at ones that are both natural, man-made, or maybe a mixture, some sort of dynamic aspect to them. And of course, they're measurable, right? So they're into this big data box. And I gave this kind of overview of physical networks and interactional networks, and then these abstract ones, which are more idea space, right? So these ones can have real physical impact, right? Money can be involved here, and maybe not so much here. All right. So there's graph theory has been around for a long time. huge field, amazing field. Euler starts thinking about bridges 300 or 400 years ago, whenever it was, and wonders about walking around on them because that's what you do. And that's sort of the start of that, right? Lots of beautiful stuff has come out of graph theory. But this is more of a physics, kind of stat mech, computer science story, because we're interested in how things become things, how networks become networks. We won't always be doing that, but that's what moves you away from classical graph theory, which is still incredibly important and useful, and we'll have occasion to use some of it, but it's a different thing. So once again, random networks is sort of the great example there. All right, we want to characterize things, so we'll see that we can do that for some of these kinds of networks, and we'd love to be able to explain them, but for instance, river networks, there's not a beautiful story for them. There's a sort of a beautiful description, but not a beautiful story for why they're there. And we understand some of these things really matter. The degree distribution, obviously, the clustering's a big story. This can affect contagion and how the thing functions, so can assortativity, how things spread, the dynamics that might play out on a network, the extent that you have modularity, right, all sorts of things. They can really then start to govern things. Obviously, degree distribution is a big story to start with. But if you think about, say, a branching network, the degree distribution is, well, it's all just made out of forks, right? So every node, which is a fork point, just has degree 3. So that's kind of a funny network. It has to live in some space. Our blood networks live inside 3D. River networks live in sort of, a roughened 2D space, but if you think of a continent, basically flat. A little bumpy, but basically flat. Thousands of miles this way and 5 miles at most this way, right? I think that's right. Everest, yeah? Okay. Okay, so there's a lot to be done. There's still an enormous amount to be done here, right? It's very exciting. It's still open. I gave a talk at Michigan last year, and Mark Newman hosted it, and it's interesting to talk to him because you can go through this and think, well, maybe we're a bit stuck, but he feels like it's like the early days of quantum theory, right? Still kind of a mess, and people are figuring things out, but there'll be this amazing result. Although quantum is still complicated, but and we are saying some strange things about entanglement and so on still, but it took a while before we got a handle on that, right? I don't think anyone's going to write down an equation, right, and say this is someone called Schrodinger or something. I don't think that. I don't know. Maybe. Okay. All right, so that's just this little overview just to start things off, and we'll get into branching networks. But I wanted to show you this. So there are so many networks, right? There are so many networks to play with, and I'm sure you guys, why does my little mousey thing not work? Come on. Oh, so sad. Come on, there you are. Okay. Let's see if we can get this to work. So this is pretty good. This just appeared. And I was thinking about this. I was thinking about, imagine, this is just for the US, and I'll show you in a second, but this is just for the US. So I was imagining the other day, and I don't know why, but think of, how many people are asleep on the Earth as the day, as the Earth does this spinning thing, right? I mean, it's going to be tied to population, right, as a function of longitude. I said the right thing. But that's kind of weird, right? Just sort of people are doing certain things at different parts of time. So this is just for the US, and it's based on a survey of people's behavior. Let's see. So what's it called? Yeah, time use survey. And I think it has the transitions, right? You're asleep, and then you get up and dress, and then you go to work, right? So this has these transitions. And actually, just a side note is that this is so I can be found. I have this thing called eternity, which, so I've recorded my sleep for no real reason since like 1999, right? Yeah. And I have a little script that can tell me how much I've been sleeping, which is useful, naps, right? But this thing, you've played with this, right? This thing, I have a little, so you end up with a taxonomy of what you do, and you switch between it, because I just wanted to kind of know what I was doing. So I have like 3 or 4 years of that, and I can plot the transitions between different states. The main categories are kids, training, home, creating, which is what I call work. It used to be called work, and I changed it to creating to make myself feel better. And then, like, special, and then play, and then sleep, and traveling, which is good. But it's fun. It's always fun to add a new thing. right? You just add a new thing. Like I have tram underneath traveling. Okay, so anyway, this is basically the thing, but I want to get that data out at some point. Okay, so let's load it again. So it has the transitions. Woo-hoo. This is 4 a.m. and I'll put on fast. I mean, there's fantastic network data. There's the financial system. I mean, that we just have to get at, right? So this is people moving between different activities, right? So sleeping, so they're waking up. So now we're getting to 8 a.m. So there's still some students asleep. Or going back, going to sleep. At work, they're actually doing some housework. Some people went to school, were admitted to it, but then they went straight to the bar, eating and drinking. Leisure is pretty enormous. A little bit of sport. It depends what people say, of course. It's self-report, right? So it's pretty fun. So this is flowing data. It's Nathan Yao. Did a really nice job.
So I noticed I was keeping an eye on the eating and drinking work bubbles or spaces when that's what doing so. And I noticed there was a lot of viscosity between points because there were a lot of people who suddenly turned green, but they couldn't actually escape.
Yeah, I wondered, right.
There yet. So it took them a good maybe 20 or 30 minutes of time to escape that cluster and arrive where they meant to be.
I wondered if that was if that's a little visualization thing, just to make it look. Yeah, because I saw that, and there's also this. So if you see, when it gets to 2 a.m. and 3 a.m., there's a little pulse because people are, or 2:30. They're sort of, they're not saying 2:30 like I left at 2:37 a.m. or something, right? They're rounding it up. So you see, there's a little bit of that. That's a long night for those people, by the way. It's where they're going to go.
Yeah, the positioning is for so we're going to come up to noon here. I think you'll see a bunch of the ones in work just kind of suddenly turn green all at once. So it's kind of like step discontinuity, and then eventually they try to work their way over to that.
Yeah. So I think it's just part of there. It's part of the just a nicety of the visualization, I think. Yeah.
It's like when the classification changes from one to the other.
Yeah. And then there's a little physics model on top because this is not. Yeah.
I was just highly amused by that. All of a sudden it's like step discontinuity, and all of a sudden these 30 people.
I want my sushi. Yeah. So I guess there are 1,000 dots, so it's nicely done like that. Right. That's a clever design thing here. 0.1%, if you like. Anyway, so that's a nice little thing. So these, so much. All right. I don't really know what is this. I don't really know how to. I mean, you can do this, right? But I can't stop this thing. Why can't I stop this thing? Do you know? There should be a little It just feels like it should have a little pause button. Anyway, that's, I guess, just, right? Okay, all right. I can't really stop it. It's madness. What's that? It just loops. I was actually trying to make it into a GIF earlier today after I finished some tarot cards because that's important. I think I could do it.
I saw a different last night. I could send your way.
Oh, okay.
Somebody had.
Yes, it is somewhere else.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I'm just sort of waiting to be done.
Actually, I saw it right before you tweeted it.
Yeah. All right, I'd like to see that. I've gone the other way, right? So you remember the Jennifers, right? The sweeping of names, first names, that thing? That was originally a GIF. I will come to your place. It's okay. An animated, a GIF that was on the Atlantic or something, and I used image magic to break it into pieces, which was kind of fun because they are just added. They're added on top, right? So it's not as if it's just a sequence of images. I mean, it's like a movie there. You're just adding the diff. Yeah, but you're adding the diff actually. So you have to when you want to break it down, you have to do a cumulative thing. Right? So the seventh one is going to be the first 7 packed together. Not just right. But I was sure I had Gifify somewhere. Look at me adapting to the local environment. Okay. All right, so that was a little bit of fun there. So, yeah, let's just, usually there's like, I'm going to talk about it because sometimes I have new people, right? So I will go on about networks for a while. But we're just going to get into this, and I will be able to give you problem sets, which I know is exciting for you. Okay, coconuts. See, it's not all, there's conchs up there. All right. So wrong. Okay, come on thing. I need another one of these things. It's a sad thing. All right, so this goes back a long way for me. My PhD was on branching networks, so as you'll see, some of this is from that time, but it's evolved quite a bit. Okay, so we're going to talk about, I mentioned these things. We're going to have, the landscapes of forking paths. Fork paths. That is Borges. No? Okay, all right. Little Borges. Why not? Okay. We had, one that I didn't put in there, the hexagon thing, right? It's the Library of Babel, yeah? Which is this insane story of Borges because he talked to... Yeah, he talked to some pure mathematicians and just wrote short story after short story, it seems, on, right? Yeah, so the Aleph, no, which one's the book? The book is which is uncountably many pages in it. So if you try to open the next page, and they have weird things. The Book of Sands. If I got that wrong? So the Library of Babel is all these hexagonal rooms, right? So tessellates, and in each room is a book could differ by one word or something like that, right? So it's this insanity of everything. Yeah. Anyway, it's accountability issues, madness. Okay, so forking paths, networks of blood. As I said, we have this story of the arterial supply goes through this could hurt, capillaries. Which one? So I say capillaries. So I can't remember anymore. I had one student who would wince every time I said capillaries. Strange. Anyway, and then this is it has to be brought back, and that's the venal network. So from what I understand, right, so it's a pretty crazy thing. So these are very small tubes, yeah? It's getting down to because you have to diffuse across the barrier, right? So these are getting down to the size of a cell, and if you don't have enough B12, for example, right, you're not getting your blood cells to divide, then you can get pernicious anemia because you can't shunt these things through. These little blood cells are pushing them through these very, very tiny pieces. So that tubes. So this is a difficult fluid mechanics problem. It's pulsatile flow with a rubbery tube, right? It's not. If you know some fluid mechanics, pipes, right? Pushing stuff through pipes is Poiseuille flow. It's a classic thing. We'll talk about it a little bit. You don't need to know about it too much, but there's a little parabolic front in terms of the velocity distribution. So the middle, of course, travels fastest, and the edges, it's stuck. We assume a no-slip condition. Anyway, so that makes for a difficult thing to study, right? But it should be in the realm of there's impedance, right? This network has an impedance. You're pushing stuff into it, trying to get it back out the other side. You want a low impedance network for that. So there's a sort of beautiful matching between hydrodynamics in networks and in fluid networks, and although this one, of course, because pulsar is different, and has the rubbery tube thing, and electrical systems. Yeah. So we can talk about that a little bit. Electrical stuff will pop up. So random walks on networks matches up with solving certain kinds of electrical conductance problems, which is weird, but it's true. Very strange thing. It seems strange to me, but it's true. Anyway, so that's sort of a hard thing to think about. Trees, branching networks. So this is they're there. We have all these trees, right? But this is a kind of a difficult thing to actually you think about it from a data point of view, right? So we had this idea of tree butts, little things that run around and measure where the, all the branches are. Because I guess the only papers we've seen about it, you take the tree and you cut it up into tiny little bits, and fair enough, and measure everything. But I don't even know if there's like a 3D model of a tree that someone's managed to, take a tree, image it essentially, and put it into a system. We've done it with river networks because of the satellite thing, which is eventually traces back to Sputnik, actually, right? So the Russians put this thing up, and Americans go berserk, and they're really worried, and then they figure out how to know where it is using multiple locations on the ground, and then someone a couple of weeks later says, we could do the opposite. If you have a few satellites, you'd know where you were, and that's GPS, right? So anyway, satellite imagery, yes. So, but we don't really have it for that. For blood networks, that's tricky, right? That's going to be a tricky thing to do. A little bit messy. So we'll talk about that when that comes along, because of course, some people have done this. They have figured out not through imagery as much, a little bit now, yeah. Also, angiogenesis, how do these networks, that's the growth of a blood network. That's tricky, right? So how does this thing grow as an organism grows? Because it's got to have this connection back. How does it work? We'll talk a little bit about that, but that's sort of another dynamic problem. I should put that in. Oh, yes. Let me just say this quickly too. So phyllotaxis, which I should have in here for this, phyllotaxis, yeah? So it's a beautiful bit of mathematical enjoyment, and it's about how things branch as they grow, plants and trees and so on, and connects in, I'll have a little piece on this, connects into the Fibonacci numbers and their associated sort of cousins, I suppose. And you can actually, you can make it with a really simple model of budding, right? That's not biological, very simple kind of model of budding. And then you can explain why you get, if you look at a pineapple or a sunflower and you count the number of spirals one way and another way, there'll be consecutive numbers in the Fibonacci series, right? So I will add that. That's a very nice piece. Why not? That's fun. Okay. Yes. Good. It's an old area. And I'll show you some weird simulations that are related to that. Okay, so yes, branching networks, they're very useful things. So as we've sort of talked about, there's supply, there's collection, and we'll take 2 or 3D, that's fair enough, right? We're not really in 4D, doesn't make sense, although there are papers, as we'll see, that talk about the fourth dimension of biology, and those people should be arrested, but that has happened. We'll see some real madness. We're going to see some really crazy stuff when it comes to biology. There's a hierarchical structure, right? So the Mississippi is this giant thing, and there are tiny little streams, and they connect together, but not perfectly hierarchical, so we have to be a little careful with that word. There are small ones and the bigger ones. Scaling story again, right? And so they're fractalish things. They weren't called that at the time. But so to connect these things, people who have looked at blood networks use the laws that emerged out of studying river networks wholesale, right? They use the same names for them for blood networks, right? They say, oh, well, we're going to go measure these laws for blood networks because they match up. Okay, river networks, cardiovascular networks will come in a little bit. Obviously plants, evolutionary trees, yes, that's a good one. That's an interesting thing. I mean, completely different business, but that's a very interesting kind of branching network. There can be stuff coming back together, but generally speaking, yeah. Organizations, yes, well, they're not really hierarchies, not really. Really good functioning ones tend not to be at all, especially creative, interesting ones. So we may talk about that. Depends on time. Okay, beautiful. They're beautiful things. So well, depends on you, but this is the Amazon Basin. So a couple of things to point out about it is that there is some divide, right? Yeah, there's a basin boundary, so everything flows off in this direction, flows this way. Obviously, things, they come together, and there's a tremendous amount of output down here. So One thing perhaps to see here is there are little branches here, right? There are little ones. This is a huge, this is the Amazon proper. It has little streams coming into it, right? So it's not a pure hierarchy, it's a broken hierarchy or a mixed hierarchy. Fair enough? So we have to think about that. The work that originally the original observation of this kind of fractal nature, I mean, I guess people have been in planes, right? They've been flying around and they've been up on mountains and looked at things for a long time before that. But we'd been able to sort of see this from high above. Is the 40s, right? 45. And then it takes about 20 years for a completely different person to appear and fix things up. But we'll get to that, yes?
When we look at when we talk about it, I feel like we talk about it, well, here's this big thing, big one in the middle, and these things that are branching off of it. That's not really how rivers work. What's happening is that you have all these little things.
They're coming together. They're coming together. Yeah, that's right. Mm-hmm. Yeah, they're incising it. So there are all these things to think about. There's where does the channel start, right? So there's a paper in Science about where a channel starts somewhere. There's actually you start to see water flowing, and then there's usually often sort of a smooth, kind of somewhat smooth hilltop around it, where there's more diffusion and bioturbidation, which is animals doing things, digging, right? Landscape being carved out just a bit by organisms is kind of nice. So, but you're right. So they reach up into it, and there's a paper from, I should put this in. This is great. There's a paper from maybe the 30s, which just talks about the evolution of river networks, and these words like piracy, for example, right? Which is a little, getting a little too excited, but this one could dig up a little, right? Just grow and grow and grow, and then sort of just start to take someone else's basin, and then that one withers, and that happens over a long period of time, right? So this is geomorphology, which geologists think is this silly little bit of nonsense on top of the interesting stuff, right? It's just a little bit of whatever. But of course, we live here, so it matters a lot. It's hard to have the dynamics, see the dynamics of this. Sometimes with, say, a volcano, you can see, it explodes and the stuff gets all smoothed out. You can see them then grow up. It took a long time for people to make, I will show you a simulation very shortly, actually, and that might be a good place to finish today. But it took a while for us to make anything in a lab that remotely kind of created river networks, right? Usually just all washed away. Yeah. So,
say making a lab physically, or
yeah, like a lab space, maybe this big, like just to be able to kind of recreate some sort of little landscape evolution story. So there are there's avalanching, there's through precipitation, right? There's of course the creation of these networks, and then then there are questions like I guess it's a while back now, but Mars, when we were first looking at Mars and really thinking about Mars for water, which seems to be good now. People were wondering, well, we see these kind of networks there. Is that avalanching? Or can you definitively say that's a result of avalanching, just stuff falling down? Or is it evidence of an old river network system? Like, do they have statistically different things? It's kind of turns out to be a little hard, actually. But you're right. So imagine this was just, you just made a big mound here, nothing on it. Then these would just grow up. They'd grow into it. Yeah.
So I don't remember if River Basin area was one of the zip law basin factors.
Yeah. Okay, so exactly right. Right. So we're going to attack it from, break it down to streams, because we can definitely see them, and they are these little pieces. But it turns out, and we'll get to it, and I guess I mentioned it briefly, maybe with a scaling relation story, which is if you take a random point here, right, and plot it, and measure the area of the basin that's part of, right? So just take a point on the network, right? So if we take this point, then it's going to be everything up, right? You have to figure it out. There's some area. Do that over and over again. There's also a length of the longest stream. It's a reasonable thing. And then there's also the characteristic scale, and I'll have some simpler versions of this. So the basin area and what's called the mainstream length, they have parallel statistics. Yeah.
Just kind of being eyeballing those.
Right. Yeah, so lots of tiny ones, and then one, really a huge one. And you see it's going to be a little funny because there's this sequence of points along here, which, right, huge basin, so they just change gradually, the basin just changed gradually, and then you have like this, and then you have two smaller ones. Of course, then you can say, well, let's look at basins across. I mean, this goes on and on and on, actually. You can look at, let's find all the basins of similar size and then compare all of their inside things. So that's going to be a delicate thing to deal with. Yeah, so scaling laws, of course. Okay, so is that sort of all right? Yeah. Trees, this is a apple box gum, I think it is. That's what it is, apple gum. Excellent tree. We've talked about trees. Okay, so this is, of course it's not going to work. So this is Marcello Magnasco, who's at Rockefeller and works on biological problems like birds singing and all sorts of stuff, and Bruce Shaw. Bruce Shaw is at the Lamont Doherty Earth Observatory, which is one of the main earth science institutes in the US. Woods Hole is a very big thing as well, and EAPS, Earth and Atmospheric and Planetary Sciences, this is where Lorenz was, if you're into chaos, at MIT. It's where I hung out. So they did it. So this is an interesting exercise, and I'll kind of show you this, and maybe we'll start a little bit. I can speed it up. That's right. So this was done for Leo Kadanoff. I mentioned Kadanoff at the end of Parkes. Kadanoff is famous for renormalization, right? For understanding that you could solve many problems, again in this kind of fractal way by saying, well, it has to obey the same equation at different scales, and you can do things in clever ways. Beautiful idea, and he's had this litany of fantastic students, right? So this was for his 60th birthday. So what they did was, so I talked about the lab experiment. Of course, you could try to do this computationally, right? So why not make a landscape, rain things down? It's just you're going to have a grid, and they'll have heights on them, right? Probably better to put on a hexagonal grid, but you put on a square grid, rain things down, some little erosion thing, there's some diffusion, right? So if stuff gets too high, it just falls down. You have a little bit of that. So some avalanching can happen if it gets really bad. And then rain will sort of push things down the steepest descent path. And you should see some stuff get carved off, right? It has to have a place to go. There has to be a sea or some edge to fall off. But you can just make a big block. Why not just make a big block in your computer and rain on it, right? So they did that. What happened was, one of them gave me a VHS. It's a long time ago. They gave me a tape. Here, check out the thing we made, our simulation, VHS. And then years later, it turned out that Magnasco's computer had exploded. So they lost everything, right? It's all gone. This very intricate, detailed simulation, which took a long time back then. The other thing was that, they had results, but they could never publish it because they didn't, it's tricky. They just didn't have, here's a model, but we're looking at real networks and they sort of match up and it looks okay, but it just didn't have a right scientific story for them. So they never published this. But I like showing this because it's quite... Anyway, I dug it up, I put it on YouTube for them, and so it still exists. Look at this, it's great. Okay, so I'm going to speed it up. 2, is that all I can do? Yeah. And we'll jump through a little bit. But so there are other simulations. I'll point to some of them. That's trying to be the biggest it can be. That's pretty bad. Also, yeah, great, outstanding movie making, really good. I played kickball with Bruce recently, I have to say, at Thanksgiving. Strange. So this is real data. So again, data's improved, right? So when I was doing my PhD last millennium, it was pretty good. We had mile resolution for the US, maybe a kilometer for other parts of the world, but that was pretty great, right? You may sort of have a pretty sort of 3,000 by 3,000, something like that, matrix with heights on it, and then you could rain on it, right? So, so you can make your own. You can find out what the networks were. You just let rain. You put a drop at each point, let it run down. and then do that everywhere else, and wherever they collect together, then you have your streams, right? It's a very coarse resolution. It's a mild resolution, but you can do it. So now we have places with 30 meter and of course smaller. Mars, we have fantastic resolution actually because of the lack of atmosphere, I guess, and we, have little things spinning around all the time. That's not bad. So it's kind of easy to make, this is good. That's the landscape. It's a bit of carpet, right? So they could have sold this one. It's great. Great. So that's not right. So now they're adding diffusion, so the tops fall off, right? So it doesn't get so sharp. And now you can see in 3D. It's a little bit better. Let's add some avalanches. It's great. I've chosen an excellent palette. It's really good. So people have made simulations. There are lots of different kinds of models. They give different universality classes, but no one's sure what the real universality class is, if there is one. We'll talk about this. There's some arguing about this, of course, right? That so that's, it's not bad. I mean, that's, well, you can see the lattice probably. That's probably what's happening. I don't know, maybe I'll come back to this eventually. This is a beautiful thing to work on. Obviously things are much more powerful, computers are much more powerful. Pretty good, not bad. So they play around with this in various ways. How are we doing? Oh, so this one, okay, I'll jump forward. They're going to do one on a volcano. Oh, I'm sorry. Oh yeah, so they put in a sinusoidal river, and then it's different slopes on different sides. It's not bad. Where's this madness? That's from start with a cone. So that's sort of the what do you call it? A volcano. Yeah. Not bad. So, and then they're lost with this, right? They don't, it was never published. And again, the real world. So, So it is one of these areas where there's just been an unbelievable amount of arguing about what real networks are and what real blood networks, river networks, what they're really like. So we'll have a bit of a tour of this madness. And let's get rid of this. I'm going to show you that the descriptions are not bad. Come on. Okay, good. But let's set things up. All right. And then we can get into it properly on Thursday. So we've got some region. We take a point P, and of course it's going to be natural. We're going to discretize it. This is going to be on a lattice that when we think about it from a data point of view, it's going to be on some kind of lattice. I do think hexagonal lattices would be really good. I think there's sort of a whole field there, right? Of trying to, instead of matrices, just using hexagonal things, which could be stored in matrices. But think about SVD for. Yeah. Okay. Right? Because if you think about SVD, it makes it's like Scottish tartan, right? That's what you're adding together, these kind of kilt-like patterns, and you make a picture, right? The singular values, this is the most important piece of tartan, and then the next one, and the next one, and you get a picture of Kermit the Frog, right? Which is pretty surprising. But I think if you had a hexagonal lattice underneath it, you might do better. I don't know. All right. Okay. So so we're going to talk about, we go to a point in the stream, it's going to be a pixel really, and then we'll, as I said before, we'll find the basin, right? So if we imagine all this rain falling down, they would all collect through you, right? And then that area will be the area associated with that point. And there'll also be the longest stream going upwards. So you march up the thing and you find the longest stream. So that's going to be of length L. So basins contain basins, so that's a bit tricky, right? So you can't just sort of, you've got this probability distribution for area, you can't just sort of integrate it or something. You have to be a bit careful. You're not just you're counting basins and basins over and over again. Be careful with that. Even on a sort of a flat hill slope, right? So there's a slope coming down here. You can think of water just sort of trickling down it, so they're little straight lines, sort of, right? Yep, like a roof, like a roof. They're just little linear basins. Okay, and there are tricky things to do with subs. A very important part of erosion, right, is actually that there's fluid underneath, but we're going to ignore that a little bit. We're going to think about just the big story of continental scale stuff. But basically, we want things to they'll flow downhill. All right, we'll allow that. All right. So these are going to be the main pieces. So I said these things before. So here's some basin. This is some point P. There's an area associated with this basin A, which is the divide is here with the dashed line. And then this is just one sub-basin. Of course, there are sub-basins at every point. It has its own length, L prime and A prime. And again, this is the main stream length. And then there are these characteristic scales. Right. So the issue, it's sort of a basic scaling issue. Right. Allometry, which we've talked about, is, do these things, are they self-similar? Is it just as simple as that? Or is there some stretching in some way? Right? Do we have some anisotropic scaling? All right, but there's a basic thing. So we'll get to that. We've talked about isometry, right? Just scale up, we get the same shape, but allometry, we have at least one dimension is scaling differently to the other d-1 dimensions. Okay, big deal. And we're really going to get into allometry for biology as well, but it's here. Oh, why can't I get this to work? Okay, so there are these somewhat famous laws. So this is the mainstream length scales is a to the h. So this was just dimensional analysis. We'd have length squared, so this is h would be a half. This is known as Hack's law, first observed with the surveying of a basin. I think, where was it, in some badland somewhere, but it's surveying, right? So this is before satellites. H was about 0.6. 0.6, but it's a small amount of data. Now, of course, because people are crazy, that becomes crystallized as a ideal value for which people then go out and try to, create. So, a little bit carried away. 0.57, actually, yeah. All right. So there are scalings here as well. This is a scaling of the mainstream length. So this is a weak fractal story. So the mainstream length, as you go up through basin dimension, right, so size, right, so sort of longitudinal size here. If it's fractal, then this is going to scale a bit faster than 1. Right? If there was nothing special to it, it would be just a 1. But people tend to find this is like 1.1. It's very weak, but there's a little, there's some wriggling, and that wriggling has a little bit of fractalness in it. Okay, and you can do the usual bit where we can stick these things together. Right, so we'll get rid of these. So we'll have area to the h is proportional to length to the d, and we can bring the h over the other way, the other side. That's this business. Yes. And there's some other dimension d, right? So the area of the basin is scaling as the overall length to some dimension d. So if that's, again, if it's just normal, everyday kind of scaling, it should be length squared. But of course it won't be, or may not be. We'll see that it isn't, certainly for some toy models. Reality is a different issue. So as I said, this is Hack's law. The scaling's between 0.5 and 0.7. This is what you'll see in the literature. This is this fractal story between 1 and 1.1. It's never much more than that. Basin allometry, right? So this is the overall length. If it's a bit funny how this is put, but it's 1 over d here. So if d is less than 2, then it's getting longer and thinner. right? If you take a little basin in a large river basin, you take a small one, take a bunch of small ones, bigger ones, bigger ones, bigger ones, and then scale them so that they're the same area, you'll see that the bigger ones should be more stretched out. They'll be longer and thinner. That's what it's saying. Okay, so just to set you up, there are a few more laws, and this is where we'll stop, right? Okay, so you go through the literature, and people have just brought out all sorts of good stuff, right? So we'll get to Tokunaga's law, which is really a beautiful thing later on. It's about how it tells you about the hierarchy, this mixed hierarchy story, which is inside us and it's in rivers. The next thing we're going to get to are these Horton's laws. So this is from the 40s. There's also Strahler, I should say, as well, as part of it came along in the 50s. This is all to do with the network structure itself, right? So if we really find these streams, there are junctions. We say this is a stream of some particular type. And we'll talk about orders. You know, what is it like as you go up through scales in this system? And then these are all continuous ones. This is what you asked about before, right? So probably choose a point on the landscape that has a drainage basin area of A attached to it, decays as some A to the minus tau. There's an L to the minus gamma for the mainstream length. This is the Hack's law business. Scaling of basin areas, we just talked about this. I mean, a lot of people got their names involved. So Langbean's law is to do with summing up all the stream lengths in a basin, right? So you just add up all of the lengths, the total length of stream. Add that up. And that scales as area to some other exponent beta. So lots of madness. Somehow, so usual job is, can we simplify this? Can we find connections between these things, which is what we'll do. And then can we try to explain the underlying, where those, say there are only a couple of laws that really matter. Can we explain where they come from? Okay, so we'll see what we can do pretty well for some models, right? For some models we can, but not, for reality it's still a little bit messy, but we will get a long way. We'll see that there's definitely a clear scaling. It might not be absolutely universal, but it's still, so this is a good problem. It's still waiting to be solved, I think, or waiting to be fully understood. Okay, so the first part, as I said, will be river networks, then we'll get to blood networks, and good, yeah, this will be good, very good. Okay, so we'll sort out office hours. None this week, I guess, and I'll give you an assignment on Thursday, just for fun. But the GitHub thing, just let's start talking about it. I know, Andy, did you put up you guys have probably used it. If you haven't, Andy put up a little instruction set, yeah?
Yeah, I think I heard it Slack.
Yeah. Yeah, so it should be there. So, and we'll have a showcase at the end. It'd be really nice. I'd love to see that. It'd be something that we can, like the papers, I don't want to put them up online, but I think this would be something, it'd be nice to stand behind and, things that you want to, you'll be able to use. Okay. All right, so that's a start. Lots of fun. The POX continues. And so thanks for coming back. I'm excited. Yeah. And I'm looking forward to really, digging into a lot of things in a really substantial way. All right, cool.